Today's podcast is brought to you by Kentucky Farm Bureau Insurance. If your property gets damaged by a storm, it's nice to know there's a Kentucky Farm Bureau insurance agent in your hometown who's committed to making things right. Rain or shine, you can count on the great coverage and personal service you expect from Kentucky's insurance company. To request a free quote, find your local KFB insurance agent at mykfbagent.com. Kentucky Farm Bureau, big on commitment. We are live in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. for this edition of Farm to Frankfort with Director of Government Affairs, John Walt Boatright. So, Ericka, we have a Gator with us, a Florida guy. But I would like to point out his wonderful old-fashioned socks representing the bourbon industry. Very Kentucky-ish.
There you go.
So, John Walt, you certainly know your crowd.
Well, always a pleasure to join a Kentucky crowd, and really a privilege to join y'all today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here.
Well, John Walt, a lot of us are familiar with your work and your role, and we like you even if you are a Florida Gator. We'll take it. But could you just tell everybody a little bit about your role at American Farm Bureau and what brought you there?
Absolutely. Well, unabashed Florida Gator, grew up, born and raised in North Florida. Worked for Florida Farm Bureau for 5.5 years as Ericka's counterpart, and had the privilege to join American Farm Bureau in the government affairs shop on a suite of policy issues that have no shortage of challenges. Those include labor and immigration, pesticide policy, specialty crops, and food safety policy for the organization. So I've been with Farm Bureau for a total of approaching 8 years now.
So you always get to bring good news, right?
Absolutely.
Everybody loves hearing you talk.
You have all the hot topics to talk about when you go anywhere of things that are important to agriculture.
Absolutely. We like Kentucky, we have a host of state farm bureaus who are regularly coming to town, and no surprise, labor and immigration policy of late has been the hottest topic in the past couple of years.
Yeah, that's certainly one that we all hear the most about in the H-2A program. And the issues you work on are bipartisan, and where you have people that dislike them on both sides of the aisle. It seems like sometimes tax policy gets some partisanship, but as kind of Congress swings, those issues are able to move. It seems like immigration has been a difficult issue for the past 20 years.
Absolutely. It invites a conversation, whether you're talking to Democrats or Republicans or independents. Each have their unique perspectives on those issues and constituencies that they answer to back home. But it really is an open invitation for us as Farm Bureau to be able to share the farmer perspective on these challenges. So it's been an exciting and interesting couple of years.
Yeah.
And we talk about Congress having its work cut out for it, but when it comes to H-2A and farm labor in general, we know that, unfortunately, a lot of what gets done in that space is handled by regulations instead of by legislation. So could you give a little overview of some of the main regulations we're seeing out there that are slightly problematic for farm labor, and also what that might look like with the new administration?
It has been particularly interesting in the past couple of years when Congress has been unwilling to act or address these challenges. We've seen really a slew of new regulations from the previous 2 years that have now started to take effect. Our latest count showed that there was about 8 or 9 new regulations totaling thousands of pages that were affecting agricultural employers or specifically H-2A employers. One of those finalized in March of 2023 was a disaggregation rule, which meant that for the adverse effect wage rate that H-2A employers have to pay, they now, if those workers tried to perform certain job duties, they are drawn from a completely different data set and likely charged a much higher wage rate than even the adverse effect wage rate. So that's been a rule that we've been fighting in recent years. We've also seen USCIS, which is a part of the petitioning process for an H-2A program. They actually tacked on a $600 asylum fee to all guest worker petitions coming in, which means that the asylum program would be funded on the backs of H-2A and H-2B employers. That fundamentally to us is an unfair fee structure that is forcing farmers and ranchers across the country to shoulder the burden of those asylum fee programs. So those are just two examples of recent rulemakings that have caused a lot of heartburn across farm country, and ones that we've been leading the charge on advocating switching or reversing those rules.
Another one that we actually submitted comments on at the end of the year was the heat illness standard. And that is a rule we know will affect not just agriculture, but a number of industries. What is that going to look like now that we have a new administration, since it was just at the proposal state?
Really good question. This has been the biggest rule that I've gotten the most feedback on from our state farm bureaus, and it causes the most concern. That rule essentially stipulates that at a heat index of 80 degrees or higher, an employer would have to implement a heat illness and injury action plan that could introduce a host of new accommodations that employers would have to provide to workers. This is something that's been in the works for a couple of years now. We've been involved at different stages of this process, but they introduced a draft rule that stipulated all of this in summer of last year. The comment period closed in January of this year, but that naturally overlapped with a new administration coming in. So it's a really good question, and that's what we're trying to determine, to engage with the administration so they hear our concerns about that rulemaking and hopefully address what would be pretty onerous rulemaking coming out of a previous administration. So we're hopeful that there will be an opportunity for this administration to actually address this, since it's only been introduced at the draft stage.
So what is kind of the best way to influence change when, like Ericka said, so many of these policies that are harmful or unfair on the H-2A employer are through regulation? So our congressional delegation rarely ever gets to vote on these things. It is just administration to administration with those leaders in the Department of Labor, Department of Homeland Security. What's kind of the best way to influence change in that arena?
Well, those processes are not without the ability to provide public comment, and that's where State Farm Bureau involvement and AFBF involvement are incredibly key. We try to monitor the Federal Register when new rules are being promulgated or being thought about, and that's really an opportunity for us to weigh in at that public comment phase. So this, in the instance of the heat illness rule, it had about 140 days to comment on this. So we certainly submitted comments along with Kentucky Farm Bureau and a host of others to be able to influence that. And then we are allowed to see how the administration responds, and if that doesn't work, or if we're not able to have the impact that we'd like to see, that's really an opportunity for us to engage with this new administration when they're out in the field. When a Secretary Rollins is out at farm shows or out on farm, that's a real opportunity to invite that conversation and say, hey, Secretary Rollins, I'm really concerned about this new heat illness rule. Now that's passed out of a different agency, but we're really hoping, as USDA has historically been, that they are an advocate for us within those federal agencies and within the federal government. So there are several different avenues we can pursue and that many of our farmers and ranchers can pursue. It's incumbent upon us as Farm Bureau staff to be able to help guide them in that effort to provide public feedback.
But I think it's important too, John Walt, is when we do call to actions, when y'all put out comment periods for us to make a call to our congressman or in, that we need to do those things, that we hear our voices heard, because we can do it as state organizations and as a national organization. But when individuals do that, I think it carries more power with it and lets people know that it is an important issue for us.
Especially with agencies that we don't normally interact with daily. we've had several recent examples where we've done a call to action with a particular agency that may not be familiar with the farm constituency in America, and they'll call up President Duval and they're like, I just got 10,000 emails from your members. Right. What's going on? And guess what? That invites a conversation between our leadership and the leadership of these agencies to actually bring to light an issue that would disproportionately impact farm country. So that's where the real value we see in farmer engagement when it comes to these rulemakings.
Yeah, and that's not a hypothetical story.
No.
I mean, that happened with the Security Exchange
with
Commission.
the SEC. Yep. It sure
That's
did.
right.
Was it 23,000 emails or something? I think that they received. It was a big number, and it changed the course of us being able to report those carbon sequestration things that they did. So he will tell you unequivocally that that's what changed that course of that got him the door open for him, is that the membership stepped up to the plate.
And that's hopefully what we'd like to see with the Department of Labor, because Department of Labor has historically been challenging to engage with on our labor challenges and specifically H-2A challenges. So we're hopeful with this new administration that we may be able to have similar success that we had with the SEC.
Well, we know that H-2A isn't just about regulations. Legislation sometimes comes into play. That's how I got to meet these two gentlemen a few years ago when I was working on the Hill and working on H-2A bills. Can you tell us, I know we're very new into this Congress, but can you tell us about some bills maybe from the previous Congress you expect to come back and be reintroduced?
Yes, there's always an opportunity, and we see each new Congress, as y'all know, as a way to re-engage with the new dynamics to try to find out what opportunities exist to be able to get the reform that really will make the most sustainable difference, which is legislative reform. 1986 was the last time we had legislative reform in this space, and we argue regularly that it is long overdue to have a modernized system that meets the needs of 2025 agriculture, not 1986 agriculture. So there are several recurring pieces of legislation that have been re-upped in recent years. One is called the Dignity Act, which is a much more comprehensive approach to the immigration space, but one that we're closely monitoring and addresses agriculture specifically. In late 2022, we saw an attempt to incorporate the Farm Workforce Modernization Act in a funding bill. That will also be reintroduced in this next Congress, we anticipate. And then there are much smaller, more targeted fixes to the H-2A program that we've seen. Representative Molinar from the state of Michigan is working to introduce the Supporting Farm Operations Act, which would pause the adverse effect wage rate for 2 years and introduce what's called a primary job duties test, which would go at that disaggregation rule that I talked about earlier. So we have varying different strategies and different members of Congress with different approaches to this space, and we're right now in the early stages of this Congress trying to figure out what's in the realm of the possible that can meet the needs of our members and deliver relief to American agriculture.
Now, we've got Congress working, we have the administrative state working, but H-2A is also going through the courts.
Yes.
We've got a few cases. There's one in Kentucky that is happening. Can you just maybe highlight a few of those cases?
Absolutely. The Kentucky case is a part of a broader effort that also included a case in Mississippi and a case in Georgia to tackle a specific rule from Department of Labor, one of those 8 or 9 from mentioned earlier, that basically would invite a lot of new restrictions and requirements on employers in the name of protecting farm workers. There were several different lawsuits that were filed. American Farm Bureau joined the one that was brought in Mississippi, and in each of those 3 lawsuits in district courts, they were able to receive preliminary injunctions for different aspects of the rule. Naturally, that has invited a lot of confusion in farm country in terms of how they implement that, but rather than rescind the rule completely, given the fact that there are now many problems with it according to the courts, Department of Labor has decided to advance and create basically new regulatory regimes based on the state that you're in, because it applies to different states for different parts of the rule. That clearly to us doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but nonetheless, that's why we're really hoping that we can engage with Department of Labor in this new administration once a secretary is seated there. We've also seen activity on the disaggregation rule, and our friends in Louisiana actually received a pretty narrow win for sugarcane growers in Louisiana to help rescind that disaggregation rule because of the adverse impacts and the huge economic impacts and harm that was incurred by a lot of sugarcane growers down there. So there are some glimmers of hope in the litigation space. We always view that as kind of the last resort in many of these instances because of the uncertain nature of it, the cost of it, and how long it can be prolonged. So there are opportunities there that we're seeing come to fruition.
I know border security and H-2A reform have been linked together quite a bit recently. And I know a lot of members have concerns about what border security is going to mean for farm labor on their operations. Can you speak to that a little?
Yes, it is something that we are hearing increasingly about over the past several months is the concern around border security efforts and interior enforcement provisions. And I'll say from the outset, we have sought to be very active in the border security conversation. American Farm Bureau has strong policy in support of securing the southern border. In large part due to the fact that so many of our farmers along the border states have had to, really face some difficult situations in terms of migrants crossing the border, endangering other farm workers, endangering families, compromising food safety standards for their operations. That's why we've really leaned into the conversation about encouraging a stronger border policy. Unfortunately, we've seen other efforts creep into that conversation about ways to heighten or improve interior enforcement. And it invites a lot of conversations around mandatory E-Verify. And also just increased efforts towards mass deportations. Fortunately, we are not hearing or seeing many targets on farms. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not seeing and hearing about a lot of fear and concern across the countryside. So we've worked hard to try to find opportunities to engage with the administration on this effort, but also encouraged our state farm bureaus to please elevate stories so that way we can turn around and use those stories to really advocate on y'all's behalf in Washington, D.C. when you're not able to be here. So those are real opportunities that we see. Again, it's certainly an immediate challenge and one that causes concern, but we have to view this as an opportunity to enlighten and inform policymakers, especially new ones, when they're starting to make these decisions, so that way we can educate them on the impacts downstream to farms and ranches.
Yeah. Well, we know that H-2A is not the only thing that takes up your bandwidth. You have a few other things in your portfolio, including pesticides, which is always a fun topic. It's probably one that people are hearing quite a bit more about now than we did a year ago. Secretary Kennedy is taking over HHS, and during the presidential campaign, that was something that was a top-line subject. So can you tell us maybe what we can expect to see and also how we're going to see the relationship between USDA and HHS progress?
Yes, this has been a relatively new phenomenon that we've seen over the past year really take hold, and we've been monitoring it very closely. It's really been an opportunity for us, again, to educate and inform not just policymakers, but also communicate to consumers about the commonalities we have among rural communities and the consumers that we serve. Nobody in this room doesn't want healthy, to have a healthy family and to have a healthy community. But it's important for us to talk candidly about impacts that certain policies could have on food security, stability, food affordability, and really the health and safety of food, not only that we share within our communities and nationwide, but also globally. So Secretary Kennedy is now at HHS. HHS has a wide jurisdiction over a number of different agencies, but that includes the Food and Drug Administration. So that includes the agency tasked with seeing, at least in part, having oversight over our food safety mechanisms. So we're hoping that there's an opportunity where we can engage one-on-one with Secretary Kennedy, but it also, again, invites a conversation with Secretary Rollins. I understand that Secretary Rollins and Secretary Kennedy had lunch on Friday at the White House to talk about ways to make America healthy again. So I anticipate and hope that will be the first of many conversations that those two will have that can hopefully shed some light on their priorities moving forward and ways we can be a part of that solution.
Well, John Walt, we appreciate your time. And before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts that you want to share with our members?
I can't emphasize enough how important, true grassroots advocacy is, and that's the bread and butter of what we do at Farm Bureau. So it's really, we're really grateful for the opportunity to represent your members in Kentucky, but also in the other 49 states as well. But those policymakers need to hear from their members, from their constituents now more than ever. We have so many challenges coming down the pike, whether ranging from pesticides to labor to tariffs and taxes. So this coming year is going to be important that we make sure that farmer voice is broadcast near and far. So that is what I would like to share with your membership.
Thank you, John Walt. It's always good to sit down with you, and I know Eddie loves getting to sit down and chat with you as well as Kyle does. So thank you for sort of speaking to our members today.
Appreciate you being with us today.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for the work you do.